Kelvin, I think this is you.
Why do I get picked on? I think the number one misconception about networking that I see is that people will see like something like automation. I think this is something that we've talked about before. They'll see something like automation, or they'll see something like Ansible or Python, or all of these technologies that are on the bleeding edge, or SD-WAN. They'll look at this and they'll say, why am I learning? The networking is so scary. Everything's moving so fast. And the problem with that is that all of these technologies that we're looking at are built on the same foundation, right? IP has been the same since about the 90s, right? And so it's more of a walk and less of a run that some of the newcomers will look at all these new technologies coming up and think that is.
Awesome.
I think there's a couple misconceptions about getting started in tech in general. If you're new to the tech industry, you may have had this dream that working in the tech industry was all like working at FANG and its highlight, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. There was actually a movie, about working at Google a few years back, and it, kind of highlighted what it was like to work at Silicon Valley, San Jose, and all of that stuff. And I know that attracted a lot of people into the industry who may have been like, it's not quite like that. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's still amazing. It also doesn't mean you're going to make like Silicon Valley salaries either. You're going to have to work your way up. So I think it's not to say, and again, if I were to do it over again, I would have chosen to get into tech sooner. But, it certainly was a little bit different for me when I got started, because I thought it was going to be a lot like that, like where every business had, a yoga gym and a coffee shop in the lobby kind of thing. And it's not. There's actually a lot of interesting challenges that you have to work with. Also, to kind of build off of what Kelvin said, one of the things that I had misconceptions of was that I would always be working on the bleeding edge of technology. And what I actually found out was it was the opposite. The biggest challenges that I had were very frequently working with antiquated technologies that needed to be migrated to something newer, which actually was pretty fun too, because it was kind of like opening presents on Christmas Day. I always got the newest, shiniest thing. So, yeah.
Awesome.
What do you think, Keith?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the biggest things that I think that I know that has held me back in the past is thinking that there's this sense that you have to know what you're about to learn, which sounds backwards, or maybe if it sounds like a loop, and it is. Because I think, well, I can't go learn security because I've never configured a firewall, right? Or I maybe work on the NOC, and so I can't learn routing and switching. I can't learn BGP because I don't work for a service provider or any of these. And that is just one of the biggest things that, first of all, is a myth, and second of all, it can hold us back. Mm-hmm. Because now we think, well, I can't go learn that because I don't understand it. No. That's the whole point, is we need to ramp up to that. Yeah, we can't start by learning OSPF if that's what we're trying to do, is become route switch engineers. But what we can do is we can learn about TCP/IP and Ethernet frames and layer 2 versus layer 3. And it's those little steps that lead to bigger things. And we live in such a way sometimes that we want the end result now. And that's so hard. Even today, I want to go understand this technology tomorrow. And I don't know how to do that. I would have to learn 15 other things to learn that technology. So start learning those 15 other things day by day, week by week. Not one of us sitting at this table got here overnight, let alone in a year or two, right? It has taken time. And having an end state is great, but understand that that journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Don't be afraid to just step into that and to take your first step, learn some basics. And again, this still plagues me today because we're all still learning. I have to convince myself, just take that first step. Learn the first little thing, and that will lead to the end goal that I have in mind.
Yep.
Yeah, and sort of to bounce off of that, some people will, because it's a fine line to ride, right? On the one hand, yeah, absolutely, you don't want to be sitting here going, well, I could never get there because there's so many steps along the way. But then on the other side of that line, some people will go, there's so many steps in the way. It's so boring. Why am I sitting here learning about how ARP works? Or why am I sitting here learning about how WAN links work? I just want to get to the fun stuff. And the reason is that when you get to the fun stuff, when you get to, dynamic ARP inspection, and when you get to BGP or some of these are fun protocols, they bounce off of the protocols that you've already learned. So even though some of the initial fundamental stuff might sound boring, and maybe to an extent, it's always subjective, but maybe you do find it boring, it's going to be very useful to have that foundation. Kind of like when you're building a house, you can build all of the fun stuff on top of that. So
Very cool. As far as misconceptions go, probably a big one that happens all the time is that, and I have it still, is that I feel like if I get a certification in this, that's going to give me some kind of reward, like a job or what have you. And the reality is, if somebody just studies hard and they pass an exam, it doesn't guarantee anything. So the certification is a framework for us, like a narrowed framework to give you some stuff to study and get good at. But the focus should be learn the content, become really good at it. And then if you want to go get certified, great, as a documented step, but that should be a secondary step, not the first one. The other thing is that it doesn't take Herculean efforts to get upward mobility, because I never thought I'd be in the world of IT ever. I fell into it. I worked at a bank, and they had this little PC back in the day. I'll date myself. It was in the 80s, and I had a lot of free time. It was inside of a Walmart, and no one ever came to this little bank thing. So I was there all day with this computer, and I just started playing around with it and figured out I can figure this out. So it's really about habits, and not some monumental thing. If I get the certification, it's gonna be great. But it's about habits and studying and continuing getting better, because I have a friend who trained at CBT Nuggets, route switch, got really good at it, and then was disappointed when he got his 6-figure job at Amazon and he didn't get to use those exact same skills. Like, I don't get to configure routing every day. He's more of he's writing scripts and things instead. So I think people are paying you for the ability to have a basic knowledge of how things work, for a basic demonstrated ability to learn new things and respond, to be a good team player. But no one's going to pay you, not you, but a person, just for having memorized the port that's used for whatever. I know this information, so what? Can you apply it? So those are a couple of misconceptions as well.
So I didn't start my tech career until it was on my 30th birthday that I decided to get started. And I told the full story to like Jeff a couple nights ago, but I ended up getting a CBT Nuggets subscription and learned from Keith at Network Plus to really kickstart the thing. When it came time to actually start applying it, I got on eBay and I got equipment that I thought would be easy enough to use, and started talking to a friend who was in the field to build a home lab. The home lab to me is the ultimate, like, to build upon what Keith was saying. It's not necessarily about memorizing facts for a certification exam. It's actually applying the skill. And when you break your own home internet and your significant other can't watch Netflix, all of a sudden the home lab is very real. So getting that thing going and taking it a few steps further, I ended up making a project where I could VPN from my outside into my home and then pull up vSphere on an application. Like, they had an iOS app at the time, and look at my infrastructure. So then what I did, once I had a good lab, a good project, I applied to MSPs, which is managed service providers, kind of like outsourced infrastructure, outsourced IT for small to medium businesses. If there's a place that's going to be hiring in your region, it's probably going to be an MSP. They usually have a lot of turnover. But the cool thing about them is that they touch, if they have 100 or 200 clients, they all have different tech. So in my interview, I was able to connect to my VPN and pull up my vSphere environment in that interview and show them exactly what I had been building. And I was like, look, I promise you, you're not going to hire anyone that wants the job more than me. They might have more skills, they might have more experience, but they don't want to be here as bad as me, because this is the proof that I'm doing all the things right now. So if you're getting started, that's what I would do.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'd hire you.
And you did.
Now, what about you, Kelvin? You've done a lot of projects to help build your skills?
Yeah. So as far as getting your name out, that's really where the core of this question is how do you get your name out there? How do you, like Knox said, show that someone here may have more experience, maybe even more knowledge, but no one here wants it more than him in that case, is volunteer work. Right. The best way to, in my mind, the best way to show that you really want to help is if you're going to do it for no money, because you don't have that as a motivation. And so if you're just starting out, my advice and part of what I did is go out there and see who needs help. Right? Because you've got all of these small businesses, think churches, think small family businesses that have IT needs, but that might not have the revenue to go hire an MSP or go hire some kind of outside consultant. Right. So use your family connections, use friends, go out there and see who needs help, and then go work there. Go on your free time. Go volunteer there. Go help them administer their infrastructure. Go help support them, because that gets your name further out there and helps people realize, A, that you know what you're talking about, hopefully you do, and B, helps people realize that your soft skills that are there, your work ethic, your likability, all of that.
That's awesome.
Keith, earlier you said that the way you got into technology was you had this one PC, and so you started fiddling around on it because nobody was coming. I mean, how easy would it have been for you to just sit there and zone out, or to goof around, or maybe even, I don't know, like just waste that time ultimately? Yeah. And so the advice I try to give often is make the most of your current situation. You've got two aspects to trying to grow into IT. It is, you have to do some amount of effort outside of work. Knox, you built a home lab, right? Kelvin, you volunteered. Keith's messing around on a PC in the 1980s. And these kinds of things that happen outside of the scope of work are going to allow you to learn and grow faster. But you're still at a job. And for most people, between 8 to 10 hours a day, you're there doing something. Now, if you're not in an IT job, then do what Keith did. Look for something technology related to volunteer, to help with. Most technology teams are strapped for resources, so if you're not busy and you can volunteer for an hour to go help somebody screw in a switch or hang an access point, look for those kinds of opportunities there in your job. If you're sitting on a NOC, or if you're sitting as a junior engineer or even an internship, be looking constantly for those opportunities to go do the thing that you ultimately want to do. Because even if it's screwing in a data center switch and you don't get to configure it, but you get to screw it into the rack or get to hang an access point, these are the types of things that will, number one, give you some amount of experience, but number two, show, as you guys have said, show the drive, show the desire to say, this is what I want to do. Sometimes they say, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want, right? Yeah, that might work in the business world. Doesn't really work in IT, but what does work in IT is trying to get your hands on the equipment that you one day want to be responsible for configuring.
Yeah, there's a big difference between wanting it and wanting it bad. When you want it bad, you'll go ask for the work. You'll go find, if you don't work on IT or the computers right now, you'll find the people who do and just be like, can I chill? Can I go to lunch with you?
Yes.
Can we talk? Tell me how to get started, because there's your resource right there sitting next to you.
Yeah. I did that with Dave Nelson, if he ever hears this. Hi, Dave. He, when I was in the early days, in the 80s, when Novell was the networking king, he was our network guy. And so I actually sat down with him and said, hey, it looks like you have an amazing job, and what do you do? How do you do it? I had no clue about networking. And that's how I actually started going from a technician into networking, which I never looked back on. Also, my dad, a long time ago, and if Dad, you're listening, I'd be shocked. He's 94, doing good still. But he taught me, he said, Keith, always do more than you're paid for.
Wow.
That's always sunk in. It's like, always, not only will you provide value for your company, but if you do more than you're paid for, your current company, if they don't keep you, you'll find another one. And so when I got my first CCIE, I love saying that, by the way.
Yeah, me too.
When I got my first CCIE, I had a full-time job, and I spent 4 or 5 days a week, 3 or 4 hours a day with many have to go back to the time machine to see exactly how many kids I had. I had several kids, and I remember a lot of people saying, "You're nuts," Yeah, you're not spending time with your family. And I thought to myself, I got to provide for this family. And so nobody asked me to do that. I wasn't required to do it, but it, as you know, it paid off in spades. So anyway, do more than you're paid for, be proactive, and be nice to people. That's another key thing too, is like, you never know. Like, we could all be working for any one of us these days, in the future. It'd be really great to never burn a bridge and be a nice person and follow the golden rule, all that. So I was at, it was a government facility. It was inside of a secure area, and so I couldn't bring my own laptop in. You can't bring stuff in. You have to use what's there. So I wasn't, long story short, I was in Cisco. You can stay in privilege mode where you can't make changes, safe, easy. You can go into configuration mode, and when you put in a command, as you all know, it takes effect immediately. So I was on a multi-layer switch on the core of the whole network, big network, and I had highlighted something from another screen, which on that version of the terminal emulator, which it was secure CRT, automatically copies it to the buffer. I went to the other switch, right-clicked, and it totally just took the network down. Now, in the moment of panic, I didn't have it was earlier in my career, I didn't have the wherewithal to think, just copy start to run. You're going to be fine. Yeah. Now I know this. But then it was like, oh no. So, it involved a switch reboot, about 15 minutes of downtime for a huge government network. So I kept my job, fortunately, but it was the worst. I mean, just so bad. Like, I knew better, but that was my big mistake I made. And it's not the only mistake, but it certainly feels like the biggest one. How about you, Jeff?
Well, I've never made a mistake, but yes, I've only mistakes. I love when you can learn a mistake, and I mean, there's always going to be consequences, right? But like, mistakes are how we learn, and I do think that we need to be all more upfront about just the humanness of any position, let alone IT especially. But I'll take a slightly different tact on it, because I've certainly taken down networks before, and I've told a lot of those stories, but a lot of my career before becoming an instructor involved being a design engineer. So I was responsible for ordering the right equipment and asking the right questions, and in a lot of cases still having to go and configure that equipment. But the design element is pretty fascinating, because you can take down a network, and that'll certainly cost some money depending on what company you just took down. I once took down a K-12 school. Fortunately, that didn't cost anybody any money, because it was, the staff was still there, the students had gone home. But when you mess up a design, you might then need to order $10,000 of equipment that you forgot to order as part of the design. And then who's going to pay for that? So are you as the consultant going to pay for that, which of course the customer is expecting? Or is the customer going to have to go back and ask for more money, because in some cases maybe they didn't provide me with the right information, and so it is their fault? It's a pretty fascinating conversation to get into in those situations. But I will say that, as rather than pointing to any one individual mistake, one thing that I did learn to do over the course of time was recognize, I didn't ask that question in advance. I should have asked what type of, I thought it was an LC fiber connector. I made a bad assumption, right? Don't assume. So I thought it was an LC fiber connector. It was an SC fiber connector. I ordered the wrong fiber cable. So what do? Well, we do have to, maybe eat the cost of that or whatever the situation is. But I go back to my documentation, my checklists, and I add that question in. And I tell you what, by the time I left that design job to come here to CBT, my checklist for questions was pretty long and thorough.
Yeah.
And thankfully, it was a very robust set of questions that really helped with a lot of those designs. So as much as anything, the reason I said at the start, like, mistakes can be beneficial. It's not that anybody wants to make one, and like I said, there are consequences, but we can learn from that. And so that's the goal. And as soon as you get defensive and play the blame game, or even just try to convince yourself that that wasn't my fault, as soon as you try to say that, it might not have been your fault, but you immediately switch it away from being teachable to not being teachable. And I want to be teachable, and I want to learn and grow. We're all works in progress, as Keith has said a couple of times. We are all trying to learn and grow, and that's just one of the best ways we can do it.
Yeah.
1,000%.
Heck yeah.
Okay, I'll give you one too. I'll leave you hanging.
I was following Keith.
Yeah, I've told a story before about where I had to migrate a file share, old file share on an old file server to a new file share on a new file server. And I used DFS replication to do it instead of just classic simple robocopy. And the last time I told that story, I was saying, like, obviously the mistake was that I used the wrong technology and it blew up the file share and the replication and there was data loss. In retrospect now, that was actually not the mistake. The mistake was kind of threefold. The mistake was that I over-engineered a solution, which is really easy to do when you really are just trying to show off or flex your skills. The simplest solution is almost always the right solution. It's the right tool for the job. You don't need a jackhammer to just screw in a screw. So that was actually a symptom of a bigger problem, which was that I was aggressively trying to climb the ladder by getting certified in every single technology that I could. And while I was going for these certifications, I was constantly trying to stroke my own ego and shove these solutions into places where problems didn't actually exist. And that was a really, really big early on mistake that I learned too, which was also a symptom of a bigger problem, which was that, to your original point, I was chasing certifications just to chase money, thinking that money was going to make me happier. It ironically did the exact opposite. Trying to skill up and get all of these certifications and chase money and all of these things actually made me so stressed out at work, trying to validate my own skills and then blowing stuff up. So the real thing that I messed up early on in my career was rushing. If I had just slowed down and kept things simple and just been comfortable in my own skin, these problems would have never happened. And I would have probably been like a lot more calm and resolved and like
some great introspection.
Awesome. It took me a while. And by a while, I mean, I think I just figured this out about 20 minutes ago. It took me a while.
I was today years old when
It took me a while to figure out that the wrong choice in a given situation wasn't just making the wrong choice. It was actually something bigger that was happening, which was me rushing through my career because I already felt late. I didn't start getting started until I was 30, right? So how do I get to the top of the career in 3 years instead of 10? You know, that's not good. Don't do that.
I mean, you know, you may not need a jackhammer to screw in a screw, but boy, do you ever look cool doing it. Just standing on a jackhammer. No. I mean, quite frankly, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I haven't been around the block nearly as long as you guys have. So my
Ouch.
You can choose how to take that.
I think you know how I took it.
No, so my list of fun and after the fact production mistakes is pretty short. I will point to sort of along those lines of rushing, because you were saying, Knox, that you started out late. I had almost the opposite problem. Yeah. Well, not almost. I had the exact opposite problem. I am the opposite problem of starting not too early, but I started early, and so there was a lot of, for me anyway, the same pressure to move up, except for a different reason. I wanted to get ahead. I wanted to keep chasing after that next gem. And what I didn't understand early on was how much these technologies play into each other. It's something I mentioned just a moment ago, except now I look at it from a different lens. When you don't take the time to properly learn every single technology and you're just looking at the next thing, the problem is that when you look at that next thing, if you do your studies based on the next gem, you're never going to be accomplished in your own mind, because you're always going to think that there's something else out there. And sure, there's something else out there. The point has been made that we are all learning and growing, but the second you start chasing after the next big thing, well, what have you just done, right? Reflect on what you've just done, and that's the biggest lesson that I've learned. It's just never to keep chasing, sure, but don't reflect on what you've already done. Is my point.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The book that can help is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm not affiliated or a sponsor, but it's fantastic. It's all about just boring, consistent habits, going in the right direction. I got a call from somebody who I worked with at Paramount Pictures like many, many, many years ago, and he goes, "I need to get my CCNA." And how'd you do it? I said, one day at a time. You know, I got some good content. So, yeah, there's that's the just to reinforce the concept of slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
Just don't give up. Just don't quit.
Yeah.
Slow and steady growth is usually, I mean, you're building a firm foundation as you go. I mean, we've probably all done some venture where we got into it too quickly, right? Or we got too high too fast. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of individuals I've worked with who have a great certification who very clearly have no experience to back it up. Mm-hmm. And they're put into positions that are, I mean, they're just going to fail, and they have failed at. And wouldn't it have been better to be in a position that where you can be successful?
Yeah.
And even though it's not the level you want and it's not the pay you want, but you're going to be successful. And then when you do get up to that level and that pay that you want, you'll be successful there.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to slow down and enjoy what you have. Those were the words I was looking for earlier.
Kudos to them for getting the cert, getting the job that they want, but also needing to recognize and having a little bit of humility that you don't have to shove it somewhere really quick.
Yeah, and admittedly, you are sometimes talking about people who cheat the system, not even necessarily cheating the tests, but your goal is, again, to pass a cert. So what do? You study to pass the certification without understanding. And so you memorize a bunch of facts, you go pass the exam, and you couldn't pass a technical interview to save your life, but if you happen to get the job, you know, we've probably all either known people or heard the stories of people who proceed to fail colossally at those jobs that they should never have really had to start with. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching, and subscribe right here to get the latest information from CBT Nuggets. And if you're new to or considering a career in the world of IT, head on over to CBT Nuggets and sign up for a free trial.